In a grand oversight of zoning and construction laws, my cousin and her family lived right outside of a landfill, one of the older ones that remained a mountain range of mostly uncovered refuse. We were just kids at the time, and my cousin being poorly supervised. So, when I went to go stay with her, she and I could go mostly wherever we wanted and do whatever it is we wanted, as long as we were out of her parents' hair when they were trying to do a drug deal. They were fine. I'm sure that already speaks volumes about her home life. But no, I wasn't old enough to understand what they were doing at the time. I just thought they had a lot of friends that liked to visit throughout the day. That landfill was strangely still, as the most fun that I've ever had. There were things that were utterly disgusting and unsanitary and dangerous, but there were plenty of fascinating things as well. No shortage of toys that people turned out into the trash. I have no idea how I never contracted any sort of salmonella or disease. One day, we decided to go as far as we could into the landfill. We imagined what we would discover. Maybe something like a hidden fairy tale world if we explored long enough, since that's what seemed to happen in all the cartoons. Well, we did find something. There was a peculiar sight, ringed very closely by steep mountains of garbage. Slabs of stone all around the edge of the clearing, as if a local monument craftsman had decided to throw away their inventory of marble and granite. When we stood in the center of the clearing and looked around, I suddenly remember becoming very sleepy. I looked at my cousin, who had a very puzzled and confused look on her face, as her own eyelids were drooping. There was something like a large wooden ammunition crate at the center of the clearing. I fought to keep my eyes open, and a glimpse of the lid of the crate opening. That was the last thing I could remember seeing before collapsing on the ground. I feel it's important to make note that I really don't know how much time has passed, but when I woke up, my cousin, who was with me before I fell unconscious, was now gone. This, at the time, was by far the worst feeling I have ever felt. The panic of realizing she was gone, and I couldn't find her at all. I searched tirelessly until I ached and hurt. Just when I thought I was going to pass out, I spotted her. She was standing on top of one of the mountains of garbage, but completely nude. I called to her, but she either ignored me or couldn't hear. She ran off to the opposite side, and I chased after her, crying. She led me back to that same clearing. Before my eyes, she slipped into the crate, and I ran over and lifted the lid, which, by the way, was hard, because it was very, very heavy. I looked inside, and my heart, I can very vividly remember this, sank to my stomach. When I looked inside, there appeared to be no bottom. There was only exposed earth. My cousin was nowhere to be found. I was sure that this had to be some kind of nightmare, so I clambered inside, shaking my arms and legs. Don't know what kind of tunnel this would be. I have no idea what this was or what I was about to get myself into. All I know is that this was like some sort of trap door that led into a deep tunnel under the earth. Keep in mind, this was pretty dangerous, even for a kid. I had no lights or really anything to direct me, but I was determined to find my cousin, no matter what. Before even really getting into the tunnel, I guess you would call it, 2 arms that were pure white shot out of the dark and grabbed me and tried to pull me down. Luckily, I still had somewhat of a leverage on the crate, since I hadn't fully submerged into the tunnel yet. I was able to resist just in the nick of time and pull myself out. I ran and I fled, coming back from the direction where we came from. I was moved to pause for half a second when I saw this strange-looking creature on mounds of garbage looking down at me. It honestly looked like some sort of rotting corpse, except to be part human, part deer. I'll never forget that it was swaying side to side, and I don't want to see what it was going to do. It let out this long wailing howl and made my blood go cold. It felt like frozen ice in my veins, and I just ran faster. Miraculously, I got away. I got back to my cousin's parents and told them that she had gone missing. They just told me that she would come back eventually, shrugging their shoulders like it was no big deal. I think that was the closest I ever came to dying on the spot, or so that's what it felt like. When my parents came to pick me up, I blurted out what happened, being only a child. They, fortunately for them, were a little more action-oriented than the other parents were, actually caring. It's no surprise that the police were called and a search was quickly launched. The junkyard was combed through thoroughly, and police say they couldn't find any body of my cousin, and they looked inside the perimeters of the matched description of the crate. Her parents were arrested and charged with negligence, among other drug charges and many other things. My parents were cleared, since they didn't know anything that was going on. All the justice served at the end didn't help my missing cousin. She was never found, but that did not mean that she was never seen. Here's where it gets weird. Going forward in time, she began to come to me frequently in my dreams. I wrote them off as stress-induced nightmares, until I would dream that she was climbing into bed with me and biting me violently. I'd wake up with bite marks on my body. They weren't the marks left by a child. They resembled more of a wild animal. Those mornings I would wake up, feeling especially hungry. Also, once in a great while, I would hear a howling that was so distant and yet so chilling. I'd look around and see that same skeletal deer figure for just a split second, and it would always disappear. Sometimes it was behind brush, other times a tree, other times on a rooftop, and like always, gone. It was real. It must have not forgotten about me, even though I've tried to forget about it. Maybe my cousin told it about me. I don't know anymore. Look, these aren't distant memories because I still see my cousin and that same creature, or demon, or entity, whatever this thing is. I'm in my 30s now, and I have children of my own, and I still have nights where I wake up with bite marks. My cousin comes to me in the shape of a child, just the way she was before she disappeared that day. Now it doesn't happen much often anymore. It's like they just show up to remind me they haven't forgotten about me, as if I could ever forget myself. So far, they have not yet touched my wife or my children, and I was afraid of having anybody else in my life for a very long time. Then, I met my wife, and the apparitions still only bothered me. So that gave me the courage I needed to fall in love, have a family. As long as it remains my curse, I can deal, mostly for the time being. As far as what entity is stalking me and what it's trying to do, I don't know. My plan is just to bear through it and see where I get. My car decided to break down along a desert highway just outside of the state of California, somewhat close to civilization, but too far to walk comfortably. The sun bearing down, and it did not leave me much of a choice. I took my time getting ready for the trek, since Murphy's Law would see to it that a ride would happen by about an hour after I walk. Well, no vehicle came by at all, and I walked for at least 2. I was smart enough, though, to take a drink with me, soda, and it didn't do much for my thirst, since sugar dehydrates you only more. I remember I was starting to swoon in the heat when I finally heard the sound of a motor coming behind me. I tried to wave the vehicle down, and it was an old, beaten-up sedan. I managed to talk to the driver, and they agreed to give me a lift. I attempted to make small talk, but the driver, well, he wasn't much for talking. He didn't look to be in much better shape than I was. Granted, I was already sweaty, and I smelt like death. He, however, smelt worse, like a mortician's assistant that never showered. I was so drawn to him, examining him and his person. It took me a while to notice that he was missing all the chances to get off the road and head into civilization. I asked him what he was doing and where he was going, but he just flat out ignored me, wouldn't answer, kept staring straight ahead, as if he were merely deaf. We then came to an especially desolate stretch of desert road, veering off at a sharp 90-degree angle, and began driving out across the hard earth into the middle of nowhere, literally. My heart was sinking, and I had a feeling that I was about to die. I was about to be the victim in one of those horror movies where they're picked up by some wacko, taken, skinned alive, who knows what else. I was carrying a piece with me though, but I wasn't going to pull it on him in a moving vehicle. That would have killed us both. I was now in survival mode, but the strange drowsiness started to steal me. I wondered if maybe the exhaust fumes were getting into the cab. The air was off, but I struggled to suddenly stay awake. That's when the car skidded to a halt, creating a giant plume of dust. The flash, the driver was on me, snapping his teeth at me. I held him off with both hands, realizing that if I didn't, he was going to try and kill me. He was trying to keep himself up, and clawing at me at the same time. I also had the two-headed task of both keeping him off my face and reaching into my pocket for my piece. Fortunate for me, I was able to pull out my piece in time, and that's when his entire form and face began to change and contort. It's like he became less human, his eyes more glazy and white, his face even somewhat changing shape. It's hard to say exactly what he or it was. It was disturbing, to say the least. I ended up jabbing my piece right into his skull, right at his temple, to stop him from clawing at me and attacking me. Had I not, he would have killed me. I quickly jumped up out of the car as he squirmed, not exactly sure if I had killed him or not. Luckily, I had found a cell phone on him, which I used to phone 911 and call the police. I know this story already sounds crazy, but I was going through a complete and utter adrenaline, fight or flight, survival. I've blacked out, honestly. I don't even remember stabbing him. After the police showed up and the medics, I explained my story, and they investigated. They found out there was something wrong about the man. Apparently, due to a recent report, this man had been dead for over a week, and actually showed me the obituary where he died about 8 days prior. There was virtually no evidence for them to make a case against me, as if I would have jacked the car and murdered him and driven for some distance, then deciding to turn myself in. They chalked it up to a possible imposter, and noticed that I had deep claw wounds all over my body from him attacking me, which were treated. I explained that he tried to kill me and attempted to kidnap me. Anyway, that's all behind me. I have a hard time with just living now, and I don't drive around as freely as I used to. I dread the possibility of breaking down in the middle of the road anywhere, and that some thing or person attempting to be something would give me a lift and then try to kill me. I'm currently going to therapy to deal with all this trauma I've had from such an event. I still live with it, and I feel that writing this out is somewhat therapeutic for me.